The signal came through the void like a whisper in a thunderstorm, barely registering on the deep space monitoring arrays orbiting Earth's outer rim. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was 3 hours into her graveyard shift at the Luna Relay Station when the computers finally decoded the transmission. What she saw on her screen made her coffee go cold. The message was desperate, fragmented, bleeding through multiple frequencies in a way that spoke of dying power systems and failing technology. But it wasn't the technical aspects that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was the content. This is Science Vessel Harmony of the Zephyrian Collective, requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by unknown hostiles. Our defensive capabilities are minimal. Repeat, we are civilians with no combat training. Please help us. The message repeated 17 times before cutting to static. Sarah ran the analysis again, checking the origin coordinates, the signal strength, the linguistic patterns. The computer confirmed what she already knew, but didn't want to believe. The transmission hadn't been meant for humanity. The Zephyrians were a peaceful species that humanity had encountered exactly once, during a disastrous first contact 30 years ago. They had taken one look at human military vessels, which Earth had foolishly sent as escorts, thinking them impressive, and declared humanity too dangerous for contact. The Zephyrians had classified Earth as a death world quarantine zone and issued strict warnings to all civilized species to avoid the Sol system entirely. Now, in their hour of desperate need, their emergency beacon had somehow reached the very species they feared most. Sarah's hands trembled as she forwarded the transmission up the chain of command. Within minutes, her secure terminal was chiming with priority messages from Fleet Admiral Rodriguez himself. Chen, confirm the authenticity of this transmission immediately. Cross-reference with all known Zephyrian communication protocols. Sarah worked frantically, her training taking over despite the magnitude of what was happening. Signal is authentic, Admiral. Translation matrices match known Zephyrian language patterns. The distress coding is consistent with their emergency protocols. Time since transmission? Based on signal degradation and distance calculations, approximately 4 hours, sir. They're in the Kepler 442 system. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sarah could almost hear the Admiral weighing impossible decisions. The Zephyrians had made their position on humanity crystal clear. They considered humans to be monsters, barely civilized predators from a world so hostile it had forged them into living weapons. They had literally fled from human space rather than risk extended contact. But they were dying, and somehow their cry for help had reached Earth. Admiral, Sarah said quietly, there's something else. I've been monitoring Galactic Council frequencies. There's no chatter about any rescue operations. I don't think anyone else received the signal. The implications hung in the air like a loaded weapon. The Zephyrians were alone, under attack, and the only species that had heard their plea was the one they considered too dangerous to exist. Chen, encrypt this entire conversation and forward all data to Fleet Command. Then report to Admiral Hayes for debriefing. This stays classified until further notice. The line went dead, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of first contact crisis. She gathered her data files, trying not to think about what would happen next. But she knew the stories. The legends whispered in the fleet about humanity's true capabilities. She knew that somewhere in the outer system, beyond the reach of civilian sensors, things floated in the dark that other species would consider impossible. 2 hours later, Admiral Elena Rodriguez stood in the war room of the Terran Defense Command, staring at a holographic display of the Kepler 442 system. Around her, the best military minds of humanity debated options that would have horrified the galaxy. We could ignore it, suggested General Morrison, his weathered face grim. Let the Zephyrians handle their own problems. They made it clear they want nothing to do with us. Negative, Rodriguez replied immediately. I don't care what they think of us. They're civilians under attack, and we received their distress call. That makes it our responsibility. Elena, think about this logically, Dr. Sarah Kim, the lead xenobiologist, interjected. If we respond, we confirm every fear they have about humanity. We show up in their space with military vessels to help them. How do you think that looks to a species that already considers us monsters? Rodriguez turned to face the room, her presence commanding immediate attention. She was not a tall woman, but decades of command had given her an authority that filled any space she occupied. I'll tell you how it looks, Doctor. It looks like we're the kind of species that comes to help when we hear someone screaming in the dark, regardless of whether they like us or not. That's exactly who we are, and I'm not about to change that now. The room fell silent. On the holographic display, the Kepler 442 system continued its slow rotation, indifferent to the drama playing out in the war room. What are our options? Rodriguez asked, turning to Fleet Commander Zhang. Zhang activated a series of tactical displays. We have 3 vessels within reasonable response distance. The cruiser Burlington is 18 hours out if she pushes her engines. The destroyer Miyamoto could reach them in 14 hours. Or, he hesitated, and Rodriguez knew immediately what he was thinking. Or we send the Nemesis. The name fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending ripples of unease through the assembled officers. Everyone in the military knew about the Nemesis, though few had ever seen her. She was humanity's deepest secret, their most terrible creation, built in the dark years after first contact when they realized just how hostile the galaxy could be. Sir, General Morrison said carefully, the Nemesis isn't designed for rescue operations. The Nemesis isn't designed for anything the galaxy would consider sane, Dr. Kim added. If we send that thing to help the Zephyrians, we'll confirm every nightmare they ever had about us. Rodriguez studied the tactical display, her mind running through scenarios and possibilities. The Nemesis could reach Kepler 442 in 6 hours. She was faster than anything else in human space, more heavily armed than most battle groups, and equipped with technology that pushed the boundaries of what the galaxy considered possible. She was also, by any civilized standard, completely insane. Commander Zhang, what's the current status of the Nemesis? Fully operational and on standby in the Titan shipyards. Captain Martinez and his crew are on rotating standby. They could launch within 30 minutes of receiving orders. Rodriguez closed her eyes, weighing the decision that could reshape humanity's relationship with the galaxy. The smart move was to send a conventional vessel, something that wouldn't terrify the Zephyrians any more than necessary. But smart wasn't always right. The Burlington and Miyamoto might not arrive in time, she said finally. By the time they reach the system, the Zephyrians could be dead. The Nemesis is our best chance of arriving while there's still something to save. Admiral, Dr. Kim pressed, you're talking about sending a warship that violates 17 different galactic treaties to rescue a species that already thinks we're monsters. This could start a war. Doctor, if we let civilians die because we're worried about politics, then maybe we are the monsters they think we are. Rodriguez turned to face the command staff. I'm not willing to live with that choice. Are you? The silence stretched for long seconds before General Morrison nodded slowly. What are your orders, Admiral? Rodriguez activated the secure communication array, her voice carrying across the system to the hidden shipyards of Titan. This is Admiral Rodriguez to Nemesis Actual. Priority Alpha Authorization Omega 77 Delta. You are hereby ordered to launch immediately for the Kepler 442 system. Civilian rescue operation, potential hostile contact. Rules of engagement are defensive only unless civilians are in immediate danger. Then you are authorized to use any means necessary to protect innocent life. The response came back immediately, crackling with static from the secure encryption. Nemesis Actual copies all. We'll be underway in 20 minutes. Sir, what's the nature of the hostiles we might be facing? Rodriguez looked at the sparse data on her display. They knew almost nothing about who was attacking the Zephyrians or why. "Unknown, Captain, we're going in blind." "Be ready for anything." "Roger that, Admiral. We'll bring them home." The communication ended, leaving the war room in contemplative silence. Through the massive windows, Earth turned slowly below them, peaceful and beautiful in the afternoon sun. It was hard to believe that this serene world had produced something like the Nemesis. Dr. Kim broke the silence first. "Admiral, I need to ask, when the Zephyrians see what we're sending to rescue them, and when the galaxy learns that we possess such a vessel, what happens to humanity's future in galactic politics?" Rodriguez considered the question seriously. It was a fair concern. The Nemesis represented everything that made other species nervous about humanity. She was a weapon of war disguised as a ship, built by a species that other civilizations already considered dangerously unstable. "Doctor, 30 years ago the Zephyrians looked at our escort vessels and decided we were too dangerous for contact. They've spent 3 decades telling the galaxy that humanity should be avoided at all costs. Do you really think our reputation can get any worse? It could if we prove them right. Or it could change if we prove them wrong. Maybe it's time the galaxy learned that dangerous doesn't necessarily mean evil. Maybe it's time they learned that sometimes the monsters are exactly who you want on your side when something worse comes calling." As if summoned by her words, another communication came through from the outer system. This one carried a different kind of weight, the voice of Captain Martinez from the bridge of humanity's most lethal creation. "Admiral, this is Nemesis. We are clear of the shipyards and accelerating toward jump point Alpha 7. Estimated transit time to Kepler 442 is now 5 hours, 47 minutes. We'll find out what's happening to those civilians, and we'll make sure they get home safe." Rodriguez nodded to herself, knowing that across the void, the most dangerous vessel ever created by human hands was racing through space to save the lives of beings who considered humanity to be monsters. "Good hunting, Captain. And Martinez, try not to terrify them any more than necessary." The laugh that came back across the communication array was not entirely reassuring. "No promises, Admiral, but we'll keep the scary stuff pointed at the bad guys." As the Nemesis disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes and fears of 2 species, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The galaxy was about to learn something new about humanity, something that might reshape their understanding of what it meant to be a Deathworlder. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe was also the most willing to help. Captain Marcus Martinez had been expecting the call for 3 years. Ever since taking command of the Nemesis, he had known that eventually someone would push the button. Someone would decide that humanity needed to show its true teeth to the galaxy. He just hadn't expected it to be for a rescue mission. The Nemesis hung in hyperspace like a nightmare-given form, her hull a study in aggressive geometry that seemed to bend light around its edges. She was not large by galactic standards, barely 800 meters from bow to stern, but every line of her construction spoke of violence refined to an art form. Her designers had not been concerned with aesthetics or diplomatic impressions. They had built her for one purpose: to survive encounters with things that could destroy conventional warships with contemptuous ease. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss called from the tactical station, "we're receiving updated intelligence from Fleet Command. They've managed to intercept additional Zephyrian transmissions." Martinez turned from the observation port where he had been watching the twisted patterns of hyperspace flow past. At 43, he was young for a ship commander, but his crew would have followed him into the heart of a star if he asked. They were hand-picked volunteers, every one of them, selected not just for skill but for the particular kind of mental flexibility required to serve aboard humanity's most classified vessel. "What are we looking at, Sarah?" The main tactical display shifted to show the Kepler 442 system, but now it was populated with more than just the Zephyrian science vessel. Red markers indicated at least 12 unknown contacts, their energy signatures unlike anything in the human databases. The Zephyrian ship Harmony is here, Voss highlighted the vessel. But she's not alone anymore. Intelligence suggests she's been forced into orbit around the fourth planet. The unknown contacts appear to be holding position around her in what looks like a capture formation. Martinez studied the tactical display with the eye of someone who had spent 20 years learning to read the intentions of hostiles. Pirates? That was my first thought, but the energy signatures don't match any known pirate vessels. The power output readings are unusual. Each of those ships is generating more energy than a human battlecruiser, but they're smaller than our destroyers. The implications were unsettling. In humanity's experience, efficient power generation usually meant advanced technology, and advanced technology in the hands of hostiles was never good news. "Commander Park," Martinez called to his second-in-command, "what's our ETA?" 47 minutes until we drop out of hyperspace at the system's edge. "Captain, from there, it's a 12-minute burn to reach the fourth planet." Martinez nodded, his mind already running through tactical scenarios. The Nemesis was designed to handle impossible odds, but going into a situation blind was never ideal, especially when civilian lives hung in the balance. "Voss, I want everything we can get on those unknown contacts. Run their energy signatures through every database we have. Check with the Archaeological Division, too. Sometimes the old ruins give us clues about technology we haven't encountered yet." "Already running, Captain, but sir, there's something else. The Zephyrian transmissions have changed. They're no longer calling for general assistance." Martinez felt a chill run down his spine. "What are they calling for?" "Ransom negotiations. Whoever has them is demanding something called life essence repositories in exchange for their release. The Zephyrians are trying to explain that they don't have access to whatever that means." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Pirates might demand cargo or currency, but demands for something the victims didn't understand suggested a more sinister motive. "Captain," Dr. James Wright spoke up from the science station. As the Nemesis's xenobiologist, he was responsible for understanding alien threats that conventional weapons couldn't handle. Life essence repositories. That terminology appears in some of our older xenoarchaeological findings. It's associated with species that practice what we might call biological harvesting. Martinez didn't need the term explained. Every human military officer above the rank of lieutenant was briefed on the theoretical existence of species that viewed other life forms as resources to be consumed or processed. It was one of the darker possibilities that the galaxy held, one that kept strategists awake at night. "How confident are you in that assessment, Doctor?" 60%, maybe 70%. The linguistic patterns match, but we're working with fragments of ancient data. What I can tell you is that if these are biological harvesters, the Zephyrians aren't just prisoners, they're inventory. The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees. Martinez looked around at his crew, seeing his own grim determination reflected in their faces. The Nemesis had been designed to fight impossible battles, but her crew had been chosen for their absolute refusal to abandon innocence to monsters. "Commander Park, prep the ship for hostile contact. Battle stations, but keep the civilians in mind. We need to be able to go from 0 to maximum violence in seconds, but we can't risk hitting the Zephyrian vessel." Alarms began sounding throughout the ship as the Nemesis prepared for combat. In the weapon bays, systems that the galaxy would consider impossible began powering up. Ammunition that existed in violation of multiple physical laws was loaded into launchers that shouldn't have been able to function. In the fighter bay, pilots who had trained for scenarios the rest of humanity couldn't imagine began their pre-flight checks. "Captain," Voss called out, "we're getting new readings. The unknown contacts are moving. It looks like they're converging on the Zephyrian vessel." Martinez watched the tactical display update, showing the alien ships closing in on their captives like predators circling wounded prey. Whatever was about to happen to the Zephyrians, it was happening now. How long until we can drop out of hyperspace? 31 minutes, sir. Martinez closed his eyes, running calculations in his head. 31 minutes might as well be 31 years if the aliens decided to begin whatever process they had planned for their prisoners. Park, can we push the engines? Sir, we're already at maximum safe hyperspace velocity. If we push harder, we risk a catastrophic engine failure that could strand us between dimensions. Martinez looked at the tactical display again, watching the alien ships close in on the helpless science vessel. He thought about Admiral Rodriguez's words, about humanity's responsibility to help those who cried out in the darkness. He thought about the Zephyrians, who had spent 30 years telling the galaxy that humans were monsters, now finding themselves at the mercy of real monsters with no one else to call. Push the engines, Commander. If we break down in hyperspace, at least we'll have tried. Sir, the risk is acceptable. Those people don't have 31 minutes. Park nodded grimly and began issuing orders to the engineering section. Throughout the ship, systems that were already operating beyond their designed limits began pushing even harder. The Nemesis shuddered as her engines forced her deeper into hyperspace, racing through dimensions that human science barely understood. 23 minutes to system edge, Park reported, his voice tight with concentration. On the tactical display, the situation continued to deteriorate. The alien ships had formed a perfect sphere around the Zephyrian vessel, their weapons trained on the helpless civilians. Energy readings suggested they were preparing to begin some kind of process. Captain, Dr. Wright called out urgently, I'm picking up new transmissions from the system. The aliens are communicating with each other, and I think I can partially translate their language. What are they saying? They're discussing harvest procedures. Sir, they're talking about the Zephyrians like they're livestock. Martinez felt something cold and primal stir in his chest. Something that connected him to every human ancestor who had ever stood between their tribe and the monsters in the night. The galaxy thought humanity were the monsters, but they were about to learn the difference between dangerous and evil. All hands, this is the captain, he announced over the ship's communication system. We are approaching a situation involving civilians being held by hostiles who intend to cause them harm. Our mission is to extract the civilians and neutralize the threat. I want everyone to remember that we are representing humanity today, and we are going to show the galaxy exactly what that means. 18 minutes later, the Nemesis dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system like a thunderclap in the void. Her arrival sent gravitational waves rippling through space, announcing to everyone in the system that something unprecedented had just arrived. On the bridge, Martinez watched as the tactical displays updated with real-time information. The situation was even worse than they had feared. The Zephyrian science vessel was completely surrounded, her shields failing under the constant pressure of alien tractor beams. Energy readings suggested the aliens were in the process of beginning whatever harvest process they had planned. Captain, Voss reported, her voice tight with urgency, the alien ships are powering up some kind of energy extraction system. If we don't act in the next few minutes, it's going to be too late. Martinez looked at the tactical display one final time, calculating angles and possibilities. 12 alien ships, technology unknown, civilians in the middle of a potential crossfire. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation the Nemesis had been designed for. Commander Park, take us in. Maximum acceleration, combat approach. Voss, I want firing solutions on every hostile contact, but keep the civilians clear. We're going to show these harvesters what happens when they threaten innocence in front of humanity. The Nemesis leaped forward like a released arrow, her engines driving her toward the fourth planet at velocities that should have torn her apart. Behind her, hyperspace collapsed back into normal dimensions, but ahead of her lay a confrontation that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. On every human frequency, emergency broadcasts began transmitting the same message. This is the Terran vessel Nemesis responding to civilian distress call. All hostile ships will stand down immediately and release your prisoners, or we will consider you enemy combatants threatening innocent life. You have 60 seconds to comply. The response came back almost immediately, translated by the ship's computers from an alien language that sounded like breaking glass and screaming metal. Unknown vessel, you are interfering with a legitimate harvest operation. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. Martinez smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Message received and understood. All stations weapons free. Let's show them what humanity thinks of their legitimate harvest operation. The Nemesis opened fire, and the galaxy learned something new about Deathworlders. The first shots from the Nemesis lit up the void like the birth of new stars. What emerged from her weapon ports was not the conventional plasma or particle beams that most species used for ship-to-ship combat. Instead, the Nemesis unleashed something that violated the comfortable assumptions the galaxy had made about the limits of destructive technology. The Harvester ships, which had been confidently maintaining their formation around their helpless prey, suddenly found themselves facing weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics around their will. The nearest alien vessel simply ceased to exist, not destroyed in the conventional sense, but rather translated out of reality by forces that human science had learned to harness during the dark years after first contact. Direct hit on Contact 7, Lieutenant Commander Voss reported, her voice professionally calm despite what she was witnessing. Target has been neutralized. Contact 9 is attempting to bring weapons to bear. Captain Martinez watched the tactical display with the focused intensity of a predator. The Harvester ships were fast, their alien technology allowing them to move with surprising agility for vessels of their size. But speed meant nothing if your opponent could predict where you were going to be. Fire control, track Contact 9's movement pattern, and lead your shots. These things are fast, but they're not random. They're following mathematical curves. The Nemesis's second salvo caught the alien ship exactly where Martinez had predicted it would be, the strange weapons reducing another Harvester to scattered atoms. But the remaining 10 ships were not standing idle. Energy readings spiked across the board as they brought their own weapons to bear on the human vessel. What hit the Nemesis was unlike any weapon system in the human databases. Instead of trying to breach her hull with conventional energy, the alien weapons seemed to be trying to drain something fundamental from the ship itself. Power levels fluctuated wildly as the Harvesters attempted to begin the same process on the Nemesis that they had planned for the Zephyrians. Hull integrity holding, but something's wrong, Commander Park reported from his station. They're not trying to destroy us, they're trying to harvest us. Dr. Wright looked up from his instruments, his face pale with realization. Captain, these weapons are designed to extract what they call life essence from both biological and technological systems. They're trying to drain our ship's spirit, for lack of a better term. Martinez felt a cold fury building in his chest. It was one thing to threaten civilians, but attempting to violate his ship with some kind of spiritual theft crossed a line that he didn't even have words for. All weapons, continuous fire. I want those Harvesters to understand that when you threaten human lives, you get human consequences. The Nemesis erupted into sustained combat, her weapons systems cycling through modes of destruction that would have fascinated and terrified galactic military analysts. Each shot was precisely targeted, designed not just to destroy the Harvester ships, but to do so in a way that would prevent them from completing any extraction processes they might have begun. But the battle was not entirely one-sided. The Harvester ships, realizing they faced something beyond their experience, began coordinating their attacks with desperate efficiency. Energy beams that could drain the life force from entire worlds converged on the Nemesis from multiple directions simultaneously. "Shields down to 60%, Park reported. "Captain, these weapons are affecting our crew as well as our systems. I'm getting reports of fatigue and disorientation from multiple sections." Martinez looked around his bridge, seeing the signs that Park was describing. His crew was moving more slowly, their responses less sharp than usual. The harvester weapons were somehow attacking the human element of his ship as well as the technological. "Dr. Wright, do we have any defense against this life-draining effect?" "Theoretically, yes. If we can boost the bio-neural field generators, we might be able to create a barrier that prevents the extraction process. But, Captain, we've never tested this in combat conditions." "Do it. And Wright, if this doesn't work, I want you to make sure the Zephyrians understand that we died trying to save them. Maybe that will change how they think about humanity." The doctor nodded grimly and began implementing modifications that existed only in theoretical xenobiology papers. Meanwhile, the battle continued to rage around the trapped civilian vessel. The Zephyrian science ship Harmony sat in the middle of the combat zone like a fragile flower in a thunderstorm. Her crew of 12 scientists and researchers had never experienced anything like the violence unfolding around them. The harvester ships had been terrifying enough, with their casual discussion of extracting life essence from unwilling victims. But the arrival of the human vessel had transformed their nightmare into something even more incomprehensible. Dr. Cathara, the senior researcher aboard the Harmony, watched through the observation ports as weapons that defied understanding lit up the darkness. The human ship, if it even was a ship in any conventional sense, moved through space like a living thing, its weapons reaching out to touch the harvester vessels with casual finality. Are they here to rescue us?" asked Dr. Velin, the team's youngest member. Cathara didn't know how to answer. For 30 years, every Zephyrian child had been taught that humans were Deathworlders, barely controlled predators from a planet so hostile it had forged them into living weapons. They were the monsters that civilized species avoided, the nightmare that the Galactic Council pretended didn't exist. But these monsters had come when the Zephyrians called for help. "I don't understand," Dr. Velin continued, watching as another harvester ship simply vanished under the human weapons. "Why would they help us? We told everyone they were dangerous. We convinced the Council to quarantine their entire system." Cathara was wondering the same thing. The logical response would be for the humans to ignore the Zephyrian distress call, or perhaps even to take advantage of their helplessness. Instead, they had arrived with their most powerful vessel and were fighting desperate odds to save the lives of people who had branded them as monsters. On the Nemesis, the enhanced bio-neural field generators were having their intended effect. The life-draining weapons of the harvesters were no longer affecting the crew with the same intensity, allowing them to fight at full effectiveness. The difference was immediately apparent in their tactical performance. "That's it," Martinez said as he watched another harvester ship succumb to the Nemesis's weapons. "They can't drain us anymore. Now let's show them what happens when you corner a predator from a death world." The remaining harvester ships, realizing that their primary weapons were no longer effective, began to retreat toward the system's edge. But Martinez had no intention of letting them escape to threaten other civilians elsewhere. "Pursuit course, maximum acceleration. Voss, I want every one of those ships accounted for. We're not letting any of them survive to do this to someone else." The chase that followed was brief but decisive. The harvester ships were fast, but the Nemesis had been designed by humans who understood that sometimes you had to catch the monsters that ran away in the dark. One by one, the alien vessels were overtaken and destroyed, their life-draining technology ensuring they would never threaten innocent lives again. When the last harvester ship was nothing but expanding debris, Martinez finally allowed himself to relax. The immediate threat was over, but now came the complicated part, dealing with the people they had saved. Communications. Open a channel to the Zephyrian vessel. Standard first contact protocols, but keep it simple. They're probably traumatized. The face that appeared on the main screen was unlike anything in human experience, but the exhaustion and fear in the alien features were universally recognizable. Dr. Cathara looked at the human captain with an expression that seemed to combine gratitude, terror, and profound confusion. "This is Dr. Cathara of the science vessel Harmony," the Zephyrian said, his voice translator rendering his words in slightly stilted English. Are you here to harm us?" Martinez felt his heart break a little at the question. Even after risking human lives to save them, the Zephyrians still expected humanity to be the monsters they had been taught to fear. "Dr. Cathara, this is Captain Martinez of the Terran vessel Nemesis. We received your distress call and came to help. You and your crew are safe now. We're here to take you home." The silence that followed stretched for long seconds. On the screen, Dr. Cathara seemed to be struggling with concepts that didn't fit his understanding of the universe. You came to help us? But we told the galaxy that your species was too dangerous for contact. We convinced the Council to avoid your entire system. Why would you risk your lives for people who treated you as monsters?" Martinez looked around his bridge, seeing the same thought reflected in every face. How do you explain to someone that being dangerous doesn't mean being evil? How do you tell them that sometimes the monsters are exactly who you want on your side when real monsters come calling? "Dr. Cathara, you called for help, and we heard you. That's all that matters. Your ship looks damaged. Do you need assistance with repairs? Or can you make it back to Zephyrian space? Our engines are functional, but our navigation systems were damaged in the attack. We're not certain we can find our way home." Martinez nodded, having expected as much. "We'll escort you back to your space. Our navigation computers have the coordinates for the nearest Zephyrian outpost. You'll be home in 18 hours. Another long silence followed as Dr. Cathara processed this information. The idea that humans would not only rescue Zephyrians but escort them safely home seemed to challenge everything he had believed about Deathworld species. "Captain Martinez," the Zephyrian said finally, "may I ask why your people chose to help us? Surely you must know what we have said about humanity to the rest of the galaxy." Martinez considered his answer carefully. The next words out of his mouth would likely be transmitted to every major government in known space. They might determine humanity's relationship with galactic civilization for generations to come. "Doctor, my species has a saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We received your call for help, and we had the power to respond. Everything else is just politics." The journey back to Zephyrian space took 17 hours and 43 minutes. During that time, Dr. Cathara and his team had their first extended contact with humans since the disastrous first meeting 3 decades earlier. What they discovered challenged every assumption they had made about Deathworld species. The crew of the Nemesis, despite commanding what was obviously a vessel of incredible destructive power, were unfailingly polite and helpful. They shared technical knowledge freely, offered medical assistance without being asked, and treated the Zephyrian scientists with a respect that seemed genuine rather than calculated. Most surprisingly, they seemed genuinely interested in Zephyrian research, asking detailed questions about their scientific work with an enthusiasm that transcended species barriers. Dr. Velen found himself in a 3-hour discussion with Dr. Wright about comparative evolutionary biology that was one of the most intellectually stimulating conversations of his career. "I don't understand," Dr. Cathara confided to his colleague Dr. Meshatar as they approached Zephyrian space. "These are supposed to be barely civilized predators from a death world. Why are they more intellectually curious and genuinely helpful than most of the civilized species we've encountered?" Dr. Meshtar was looking through the data they had collected on human technology during the rescue. Kethara, I think we made a mistake 30 years ago. A very large mistake. When the Harmony finally reached the Zephyrian outpost at Kepler 438, word of the rescue had already spread throughout their space. The response was unlike anything in Zephyrian history. The species that had spent 30 years painting humans as monsters had been saved by those very same humans who had asked for nothing in return. The political implications were staggering. The Zephyrian government faced the uncomfortable realization that they had potentially alienated the one species in the galaxy powerful enough and willing enough to protect civilians from existential threats. Captain Martinez stood on the bridge of the Nemesis as they prepared to depart Zephyrian space. The mission had been a success by any measure. The civilians were safe, the threat had been neutralized, and no human lives had been lost. But he knew that the real consequences of their actions were just beginning to unfold. "Captain," Dr. Kethara's voice came over the communication system one final time. "Before you depart, I wanted to thank you personally, not just for saving our lives, but for showing us that we were wrong about humanity. I will be recommending to my government that we formally request a revision of our species classification for humans." Martinez smiled, thinking about Admiral Rodriguez and her belief that sometimes dangerous was exactly what the galaxy needed. "Dr. Kethara, humanity doesn't need the galaxy's approval to do what's right. But if other species want to work with us to make the universe a safer place for everyone, we'll always listen." As the Nemesis jumped back into hyperspace, heading for home, Martinez composed his after-action report. The galaxy had learned something new about Deathworlders today. They had learned that the species they feared most might also be the ones most willing to stand between innocent life and the real monsters that lurked in the darkness between stars. 3 months later, the Galactic Council received a formal petition from the Zephyrian Collective requesting that Earth's quarantine status be revised. The petition was co-signed by 17 other species who had reconsidered their positions after learning about the Kepler 442 rescue. The age of humanity's isolation was ending, not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple act of helping those who called out in the darkness. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe was also the most trustworthy guardian they could ask for.